But this way, markets are two things. Markets are psychologically driven, and that's the big piece that I always bring to the table is that I'm a contrarian, and I think sentiment matters a lot. And going contrary to that sentiment matters a lot at turning points. But there's no doubt that markets also are fundamental. They are driven by fundamentals. So like I said, we're kind of in a sweet spot where you can have lower rates and an economy not doing great, but it's not doing terrible, right? It's a kind of soft landing scenario. So you can discount those earnings, and the companies have shown their ability to kind of squeeze out earnings as long as the economy's not in the dumps. So you can have a period here in the first half of the year where it looks pretty good for the stock market or for stocks. But I think we are trending towards and gravitating towards a global bust. And a global bust is not just a global recession, it's something worse. It's, yeah, the simplest thing I say is it's worse than 2008-9. It comes with a financial crisis, and I think that financial crisis, as bad as 2008-9 was, this one could be worse. The leverage in the system is much higher. The fragility of the system because of the pandemic earlier this decade, because of that pandemic, underlying the economies is a lot of problems and weakness. So, both here in the United States, but particularly in Europe, you've got all the issues that come with the energy issues, et cetera. So I think second half of this year might look very different than the first half economically. That could be part of what ultimately tips things over. Another interesting thing, this is, I can't know this is going to happen, but my bet is that let's say Powell starts cutting. Let's say the Fed starts cutting here, first quarter or certainly second quarter. Maybe they hold their powder and they just don't hike. Either way. But if we get what I'm calling for, which is a melt up to S&P 7,000, and I had been saying 6,000 to 7,000, I've raised that 7. I took the bottom range off. That's how bullish I am. If we get this thing pushing over 6,000 on its way to 7,000, I think you're going to see Powell and his FOMC members look at that and say, we got to hike again. The animal spirits are just too strong here. Keep in mind, in April of 2022, Bill Dudley, the former head of the New York Federal Reserve, the economist from Goldman Sachs, in April of 2022, he delivered a speech where he talked about the importance of getting the stock market lower because the stock market was part of the financial conditions out there. So if you had a strong stock market, you really weren't tight because people could use that wealth they were building in the stock market to spend. So he felt a component of tightening, because the Fed was just beginning its tightening, he spoke strongly about the need to get the stock market down below 3,000. That was his, talk. At the time, obviously, the market was up over 4,000, and people got pretty bearish. Powell bought that hook, line, sinker. He really believed Bill Dudley was correct, that the stock market was a part of what they had to focus on, and you could tell that from that April date all the way through last year. Every time the stock market had a rally, particularly after a Fed meeting, if they got excited that, hey, maybe we saw something in Powell's words or in the minutes or what have you that indicated that the Fed was almost done, the market would rally. He sent out his fellow governors one after another to talk the market down, say they're misreading things. We're still hawkish. We're still on guard. We still think inflation's our job number one and that we haven't finished our job. We think it's higher for longer. All those terms that were out there, all those words were aimed at the stock market because they felt the stock market was too high and needed to go south, and south by a lot. By early this past year, by early 2023, because you had that big rally between October of 2022 at the bottom, 3,500, And by January, February of 2023, it was up to 4,200. All that time he had been jawboning, the market would take his jawbone and go the other way. It went up. So he finally, in the first quarter of 2023, kind of backed off being quite so obvious about trying to talk the market down. He would still give some lip service to it during his press conferences after Fed meetings. And you could tell he was very cognizant of how much the market was listening to his words. So he tried to give still a bit of a hawkish tone to his talks, even if they were showing some signs of easing or backing off their tightness. And then that it continued through the year, and even later October, fall of this year, when the market really took his words more bullishly, he didn't really fight it as much because he knew, I think he was starting to realize I'm looking pretty silly here. I'm trying to jawbone it down. The market's ignoring me and going the opposite direction. So, but deep down and under the surface, you can tell he still kind of buys into that Dudley view that market is a part of financial conditions, and if it's rising, it's we're not it's offsetting some of our tightening. So if we get a market that is 6,000 on its way to 7,000, I think you're going to see the Fed potentially come back and hike again. Now, what they may be doing is hiking while the economy is continuing to trend down into a recession. They might ignore, let's say if we took the stock market out of the picture, they might be saying, yeah, we got to ease some more, or we want to continue our easing here because the economy's, going south. But because the stock market's part of this, it might distract them from what they'd say based on the economy. And they might actually say, yeah, maybe we have to worry a little bit that the economy, the economy's not falling apart, and the stock market is showing that there's too much speculation out there. And plus, not just Dudley, this whole thing about the Fed put, that the predecessors to Powell were guilty of propping up the market constantly, and he's been very clear that he doesn't want to be guilty of that. So all that stuff tells me if you see a strong market, he's going to have a tendency to want to retighten. And if you get hikes, one or two hikes, when you're on the verge of the economy going the wrong way, and faster, meaning it's in recession on its way to a hard landing, that could be a terrible error. And so I think that could be a contributing factor. It's not that that's the only thing that pushes you into a global bust and what I call an 80% bear market potential, but it could be the thing that tops us out and gets us going that way.